I'm Mike Greiner, a Democratic activist concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, and maybe you could like this video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe even hit that little bell that notifies you when I post a new video, because I do try to post pretty frequently. Today I want to talk to you about the employment figures, because there's been a lot of attention paid to them. Mostly, the news has been about how disappointing they were. Last month, the hiring figures were a substantial disappointment, and that this month's figures were okay at best, that a little bit below what were expectations. So I want to talk to you about what these figures really represent, and kind of give you some information that will help you become a more informed consumer of this information, because the figures represent certain assumptions that are worth knowing about, and that'll help you kind of understand what the reporters are talking about when they're reporting on what economists are saying. So let's start with the first issue, which is not meeting expectations. Whose expectations are these figures not meeting? Well, what happens is that there are surveys of economists. These surveys try to assess how many employees the economists believe the economy will have added in a month. Now, this is based on lots of assumptions that the economists have, and let's start with this. This is an average. So obviously, there are a certain amount of economists who believe that there would be more hiring, a certain amount of economists who believe that there would be less. So the figure that is often cited as what were economists' expectations is just an average and doesn't represent any kind of consensus among economists. The second thing is, these predictions are obviously based upon the biases that these economists have anyway. Economists are also going to be Democrats, Republicans, moderates. They're going to have certain strong political views, certain less strong political views. They're going to have certain religious views. They're going to live in a state that impacts the way that they view things. And these biases and these environments in which the economists develop their assumptions are obviously going to impact the predictions that they make. As academics, we try to recognize that we've got certain biases, that we've got certain assumptions that are going to impact the way that we interpret data. And that's why we talk about these things, and why so often we are accused of being obsessed with identity and engaging in cancel culture. No, what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand how our biases will stand in the way of us truly understanding what the data means. Because ultimately, we as academics, what our role is our role is to try to find truth. So if our biases as human beings, because we're human beings too, just like everybody else out there, if our biases are standing in the way of us being able to deliver truthful information to everybody, then we want to know what those biases are and perhaps try to have some adjustment, some correction applied to our predictions as a result of that. I have made certain predictions that were terrible. I can tell you that at one point I predicted that Mike Bloomberg was going to win the Democratic nomination for president. I did that largely because of the fact, probably, that I was upset that my choice, Elizabeth Warren, was not likely to win the nomination. So I responded emotionally, and as such, I made some predictions that were not really probably based upon the facts. I could justify them, because obviously when you emotionally believe in something, you want to justify it. But obviously there was a certain amount of my decision that was being driven based upon my own feelings. And that's true for economists whenever they're assessing any kind of data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that economists are dealing with very rough information. There is so much data out there about so many different things that are going on that sometimes it can be difficult to weigh which information is worth paying attention to and which information is not worth paying attention to. That's a challenge that all economists have to address. That decision as to what you're going to prioritize, what information you're not going to prioritize, that is also driven by our biases, heuristics, and the environment in which we operate. So those are going to impact then the predictions that we make. Now, finally, the figures themselves need to be understood. The number that's most often cited is the increase in hiring of non-farm payrolls in the last month on a seasonally adjusted basis. So let's break this down for a minute. This does not include people who are independent contractors. This does not include people who are self-employed. This does not include people who work on farms. So as a result of that, there could be a lot of economic activity in these groups that's not measured by this figure. And there has actually been a lot of economic activity with people starting their own businesses. After the experience that they've had with COVID, they're saying, hey, maybe we should rely upon ourselves. And there has actually been an increase in small business creation as a result of that. So that is not taken into consideration in this figure. The second thing that I really want to emphasize is the idea of seasonally adjusted. So there are some seasons where you'll see a lot of hiring. Some seasons where you see less hiring. Like, for example, as we get into the Christmas season, there's a lot of hiring by retail organizations looking to get additional people to help them stock shelves and manage the crush of customers who are going to be coming in the door. What this data will do is it will take an average of what has been done in the past and then use that average to adjust the figures that are coming in now. So when we said, for example, that last month only had an increase in hiring of 278,000 employees, and they thought that that was a significant disappointment, that is on a seasonally adjusted basis. Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of hiring that goes on as we're getting into the summer months in typical years. That average then is basically used to reduce the actual figure. So when they say 278,000 people were hired in that month, that is on a seasonally adjusted basis. So how many people were actually hired that month? Well, if we look at the actual figures from that month, we can see that there are actually more than 1 million hired. So wait a minute. They claim that 278,000 new jobs were created, but yet over 1 million people were hired. The difference is this idea of seasonal adjustment. Now, in a normal year, it makes sense to take into consideration these seasonal variations of hiring. But this is not a normal year, is it? This is a year where we're recovering from the pandemic and the economy is really going through some difficult adjustments as it tries to speed back up. So as a result of that, maybe we should consider what the non-seasonally adjusted figures say. And what the non-seasonally adjusted figures say is that last month, over 1 million people were hired. That this month, the most recent report, we had just under 1 million hired. Now you've got multiple months with over 1 million people hired per month. That should be the figure that we're talking about. These are major increases in employment. The job market is doing well, and this is something that can be credited to the fact that the economy is bouncing back largely as a result of the efforts of this administration to widely distribute vaccines and to get the economy going again. So rather than focusing on what are supposedly disappointing employment figures, maybe what we should do is to take into consideration the fact that, number one, they're disappointing relative to predictions of economists who really are looking at tea leaves and making guesses based upon information informed by their own biases and the environment in which they operate, and that these figures then are seasonally adjusted based upon what happened in prior years, which are completely different from what's going on in this year. When you take these issues into consideration, suddenly the employment picture doesn't look so bad. Suddenly it looks like we are hiring at a very fast clip. This is really something that should be celebrated, not treated as something that's a disappointment, the way the media has done. So in the future, what you can do is when people tell you, oh, you know, the employment situation is not so good, you'll be able to respond to them that is, number one, based upon limited assumptions of a survey of economists. Number two, based upon seasonally adjusted figures that are adjusted based upon seasons in years that are completely unlike this one. So really, we need to feel good about the fact that employment is increasing by more than 1 million people per month on average. And that's really something to celebrate. So with that, I'll encourage you to spread the word. And in addition to that, if you agree with me, disagree with me, or have any concerns, maybe you could put some comments down at the bottom. I always like to see the comments that you have. Also, maybe if you could like this video, if you could subscribe, and maybe even hit that little bell that will notify you when I post a new video, that would be great. And I will see you in my next video. And in the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.